Hello, and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Bern. I'm your host, Eric Miller, joined today by an awesome progressive from the great state of New York, Marcela Mitaynes. How you doing? How did I do with your name, by the way?
That's the first time I've heard it pronounced that way, but I like it.
Oh, okay, okay. I watched an interview with you, and I swear someone straight up called you Martinez, and I was
That I get called that all the time, and I've just gotten used to responding to that.
I
There's,
was kind of watching your face, like, how is she gonna react to that? Cool.
I mean, it's a difficult name to pronounce. A lot of the letters look like they don't, belong together. And then there's some folks that pronounce it with a Spanish accent, and then some folks that just say it in English.
Okay, so how's your preferred way?
I say Marcela Mitaynes, but I
Okay.
hear Mitaynes. I hear and the way you said it was the first time I heard it, but I like it.
I'm creative. I'm breaking new ground here. So I think you're awesome. So you are a progressive. Recently made it through your primary in the New York State Assembly District 51, which is like Brooklyn, Red Hook. I guess Sunset Park is the bigger chunk of that. Unseating a 26-year incumbent, I assume, probably David Goliath. I assume he had a lot of real estate money behind him, and I assume you knocked on a lot of doors. Is that a fair summary?
We knocked on a lot of doors, and then COVID hit. We had to figure out a way of switching. But yeah, it's a lot of knocking on doors, a lot of phone calls. I believe we knocked on 17,000 doors and made about 130,000 calls. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, right on. And you won. So won the primary. So the general is in November. As of now, there isn't a Republican challenger. There's not likely to be. So this is cool. So I want to talk about like your policy, your platform, your background, do a bit of a profile on you. I'm not going to pretend I know anything about New York tenancy rights because I do not, and you are a super expert. But kind of back to the beginning. What like activated you politically? What started you on this path?
Well, I was, in 2006, there was a new landlord that purchased my 35-unit rent stabilized building. And within 6 months, he was able to displace half of the families. We didn't know what was happening. We were all scared. Nobody wanted to get evicted. And then, learned a lot about what was happening in the neighborhood, learned about gentrification, learned that the current tenant laws weren't really protecting tenants the way they should be. Understanding that the laws that were passed were really favoring and allowing landlords to be able to evict tenants and flip the apartments and make them more expensive. Understanding the way the legislation works, understanding that our elected representatives were passing these laws, and then understanding the hold that the real estate industry had on New York politics. And then that just made me really mad. And I ended up getting evicted. I lost a 2-bedroom apartment that I was raised in with my family that I had lived in for over 30 years. And I got together with some neighbors who were experiencing the same displacement pressures, and we were upset and we wanted to change something, and we started organizing. Little did I know that there was a whole tenant movement happening in New York City. I got plugged into that, continued advocating in my community for a little over a decade, helping individuals and also helping tenants building wide get repairs that they needed, making sure they're not getting evicted, making sure they're being overcharged in rent, but also plugging them in, educating them on their rights, discussing, the way the rent laws were passed, and really getting them involved in the larger organizing work. And then, the culmination was passing historic rent laws in June of 2019.
Right on. Yeah, amazing. So what does that work look like? Is it like how would people get in touch with you? Did you work with an organization? Is it kind of like casework where you sort of become an advocate, through the courthouse or whatever for a tenant?
So it's both. There is a community organization that I eventually started working for called Neighbors Helping Neighbors. And they were actually starting to get a bunch of tenants from the building that I lived in trickling in and, asking for help, they did try and come into my building and try and organize it. But a lot of us didn't really know who they were. We were afraid. A lot of us really even thought that they were spies from the new landlord, so really not trusting them.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But we were able to connect. Unfortunately, by the time I started working with them, I had kind of figured out a lot of stuff on my own and was at that point where there wasn't much else I could do. Except, just try and fight in housing court. But even housing court, it was very clear that they were more favorable to the landlords. But I started participating with the community organization, and they had a monthly tenant group. And it really served as a form of therapy, in the sense that I don't think people understand the trauma that's inflicted on our families when they get displaced. I was organizing with them for about a year, learning about, this whole tenant movement and, about the laws and stuff and wanting to change them. And then, I had an opportunity to transition from a participant to an employee. And so that's really what started, this path that I was on. So there's a lot of advocacy work, one-on-one casework. So tenants that are facing evictions, tenants that need repairs, I assist them one-on-one. But I also go into buildings and try and start tenant associations so the tenants can work collectively. And I work on various campaigns, both at the city, state, and federal level, organizing for stronger tenant rights.
Right on. Does that neighbor organization still exist? Do you want to plug that, or any others that you recommend? And is there anything like that at a federal level? There isn't, or at a national level?
So they are a community organization that gets funding from the local, city, and federal level, as well as they rely a lot on donations. There's certainly people that are doing work on the federal level, and then there's this huge association that I work with on the federal level that does work and organizes around tenants that have Section 8 and live in HUD housing. Neighbors Helping Neighbors still exists. I took a leave of absence for the election. Right. The election was on the 23rd, and on the 29th, I was right back at work. I'm still working now.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So if someone wants to, the reason I'm mentioning that is if someone has a similar issue, and we'll get into a little bit more, and they live, in Oregon or whatever, what steps would someone take, to learn more about their tenancy rights?
I would probably even just Google. I think people are surprised, and even myself, all the headaches that I was going through, not knowing my rights. I had no idea there was an organization in the community that did tenant advocacy and organizing. But even through the work that we do get a lot of referrals that are just word of mouth. So I get calls, even though I'm located in Brooklyn and my catchment area is pretty much South Brooklyn, I get calls anywhere from the Bronx and Queens that someone's friend or relative I've helped, and they don't know who else to go to, and they just call. So we usually try and figure out where they're located and try and find either a local organization or a local group that's doing this type of work to plug them into, because it's more than just a single issue. Even if you get the help for your one problem, it's usually not the end of it. There's usually additional assistance or help you're going to need, going down the line.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of, this has been your focus professionally and personally, but your platform, when you're in the state assembly, is not going to just be that, right? Like you're also an advocate for environmental justice, Medicare for all, immigration rights. These things all are intersectional, right? And I imagine, I would think that, can you talk about, there's this thing, until you experience it, like you said, in your personal situation, you don't really have a cause to learn about it, right? And I imagine, a lot of undocumented people face, exploitation because they don't know their rights and they have fear of ICE and whatnot, right? Can you talk about just the overlap of those things?
Sure. To me, housing really is the foundation of everything. You can't build or grow unless your foundation is strong. And like you said, it's very intersectional with the other parts of your life. It impacts your health, it impacts your employment, it impacts your education. But particularly what we're seeing in New York City, and particularly in my community of Sunset Park, which is predominantly immigrant, Asian, and Latino, we are seeing the use of the immigration status as a threat. So threatening to call immigration is not something, that's new. That's sad to say, but that's stuff that we've been dealing with even before this president came in, even before this pandemic is happening. But we're certainly seeing it used much more aggressively, where landlords are telling them that they're going to call immigration. And the thing is, we are starting to see like immigration agents in certain neighborhoods. So it is much more real and a lot scarier.
But no doubt. Sorry?
It's harassment.
Yeah. Is it in a legal sense? Like, like what rights does somebody have when they're confronted with that? If they're undocumented and they get that threat, like what can they do? Right? It's
difficult. Yes. Before, we used to tell them that the likelihood of immigration coming to someone's home because a landlord is complaining was very unlikely, right? That we knew that the government was really focused on folks that were committing illegal acts and going after them.
Right.
But things have changed a lot. So it really is scary times. And we've seen some landlords go to extremes, threatening tenants on the street, telling them they're going to come home and, their kids are going to come home and find an empty house because the parents are going to be gone. I mean, it's gotten really ugly.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that's terrible. So presumably abolish ICE is your position, right? That's, yeah.
Yes. Along with wanting to make sure that folks that are going through deportation proceedings have access to free legal representation.
Yeah. Yeah. So there, real estate obviously is a massive thing. And, like we said, your incumbent was, your opponent was a 26-year incumbent. And like I said, I'm assuming he had big real estate money behind him, right? So you have, you're fighting for the little guy, right? You're fighting the uphill battle, right? Like how did you successfully do that? And, what's the biggest challenges you think you're going to face in terms of when you get to Albany? Like I'm sure there are bills that are kind of somewhat through the legislature that you support, maybe highlight a few of those, but, what are going to be the biggest challenges for an advocate of the people fighting against that real estate machine when you get to Albany?
Yeah, I think for me, just realizing the power that I had as an individual and the power that we can wield collectively within the tenant movement has been really eye-opening. And being able to see, folks that I work with come in and really be afraid of the landlord and think that they had all the power, kind of like educate themselves on the rights and really learn to fight back and understand that power and being able to wield it has really been the transitioning part, right? Understanding as folks, the working class has felt ignored for a really long time, and understanding that there are things that we can do when we come together. So that's been really great. And that's really been a big part of the campaign. So the campaign wasn't just focused on one person and getting them into office. It was really focused on this movement that we wanted to build that was going to go beyond this one election cycle, beyond this one candidate, right? And the possibilities of what we can do. I think also with this pandemic, the working class and the majority of the immigrants have really been hit hard. And so one of the first things that I really want to fight for is the New York Health Act, and really this idea that healthcare is a human right and something that we should all be able to access, and that it really benefits all of us in the end.
Right on, yeah. And it's the makeup of the state assembly is, I guess, a little over 2-to-1 Democrat to Republican, right? So, yes. But that aside, like how many progressives are in that in that makeup, right? Like, is it an uphill battle? Are you one of few, or are you joining an established, sort of progressive caucus, if you will, within the state assembly?
So definitely, there is a small number, but we're growing, and I think that that's something also that we've learned, right? That the power that we have when we vote, and making sure and understanding that legislation isn't passed by one person, that it really is collective work, and if we really want to see progressive legislation passed, then we need to make sure that we're electing the people that are going to do that. So I am one of 4 Democratic socialists that were elected, along with another slew of progressives. So it's a really exciting time that there's a nice group. I think there's about 6 of us going in. So that may not be enough for a majority, but if we play our cards right and we're organizing the way that I expect us to, we can definitely be a block to a lot of things.
Right on. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So let's talk a little bit about your district in terms of like environmental issues, right? So, what we talked about the intersectionality. How does the Green New Deal? How does climate change? How are these things affecting, your district in Brooklyn?
So, understanding that we are in a working class community that's been ignored for a lot of times. We are very close to a highway, so there's been a lot of air pollution. We're also in a flood zone, so we got hit really hard by Superstorm Sandy, and we actually have the largest and last working waterfront in New York City, and we are currently in the process of it being rezoned. And we're mounting a huge resistance because what they want to do to that industrial manufacturing space is really create a playground for the rich. They're having wine tasting events, and they have these their little flea markets, and they're having concerts, and so they're already doing a lot of damage. And the displacement pressures have just increased since they've been there and developing. But what they're trying to do now is going to just multiply the displacement pressures. And what they're trying to do is expand their property 1 million square feet, and they want to change the zoning rules to allow new types of businesses. And what they're thinking about is they want to bring in 2 luxury 300-room hotels with the convention center, and they want to create a luxury shopping mall, which to me doesn't make much sense in a working class residential community, that they want to make it like a tourist destination place. I don't know why anybody wants to continue to push to build for a shopping mall when we're seeing all these big businesses closing because of the pandemic, and most people are shopping online. Same thing with the hotels. Nobody wants to travel. We're still in the middle of this pandemic.
Right.
And so we're seeing the fact that they are more concerned about the return on their profits than really wanting to build a resiliency for the future, especially with the climate change. And so they're trying to build all of this stuff in a flood zone area, and we've got bigger plans. There's an amazing environmental group that's working in the community called Uprose, and they have a vision of what that, how we can create space for the future and future green jobs. And so we have an opportunity, if we're thinking large enough, to be at a point of making history by being able to provide the space that's going to need it for these future green jobs. And we're talking about union jobs that are going to allow people to be able to continue to live in this community while it continues to change.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, the aforementioned plan, they're displaced, right? That's kind of half of the point, right?
Yeah. A lot of the industrial businesses are moving, but they're not moving because there isn't industrial work. They're moving because the land prices are just too expensive.
Right. Right. How about criminal justice reform? I know that's another issue that you're strong advocate on. Talk about that in your district.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen the way Black and brown people are disproportionately affected, and the long-lasting impacts it has on individuals and communities. So definitely wanting to have reform on that part. I think there's been a big push particularly throughout the states. And we've certainly been a part of that, where people have been taking the streets. There was one night, in fact, I was stuck on the Manhattan Bridge for a couple of hours because we ended up being, locked in by the police on both sides when we started taking the streets. But it's really important, and there is a lot of support for that. And I think that there's still a lot of education that needs to be done too, around what it really means to reform the police and what it really means when we talk about criminal justice, right? And wanting to make sure that medical and health issues are treated in the proper way. And for someone who may have, like, for example, a drug use, that the incarcerating them is not really going to fix anything. They end up going to jail and they come back and they're still having the same problems, right? So really looking at things like that through a health lens and starting to make those changes and starting to provide the services that people really need.
Right on. Yeah, and investing in them, that's what the defund the police movement is about. I'm preaching to the choir, right? It's, reallocating money from, someone with a gun to a social worker, right? To answer wellness checks, right?
Right. And the fact that, for as many times I've been out in the street protesting, we're peaceful protesters. We're just out there marching with signs. To then be confronted with police in full riot gear, it just seems absurd to me how they continue to have this narrative that we're the aggressors. Right. I have a cardboard sign that I'm holding. It's like, how much can I hurt you? Meanwhile, you've got a helmet, you've got a shield, you've got a baton. They've got those laser. What is it? Laser? I forgot what it's called. Those tasers. They're using these trucks that make really, really loud noises, and just all these other things that just seem so extreme and unnecessary.
Yeah, and like just clueless, because you're protesting police brutality and they answer it with police brutality. Like,
exactly
how less self-aware could someone possibly be? So let me ask you this: like, through your 10 years of advocacy, did you, why now did you decide to run? Like, what, I have to imagine, if you've applied yourself to a decade of this work on the front lines, you're a good actor on this, right? Like, getting into the assembly, like, you have to have like a lot of fire in your belly. Like, I can't wait to get on this bill or that bill. Like, what is there now that is either atrocious that you want to like kind of correct, or what is there that's sort of under appreciated that you want to elevate, legislatively speaking?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great progressive bills that I feel could go really far in helping folks. I think there isn't sufficient will in wanting to make them happen. And a lot of that has to do with the corruption and special interest. Despite us being in a pandemic and it just making sense to provide everyone with access to healthcare, the fact that there's still people resistance to it just doesn't make sense. But when you start talking and explaining to people how, it really is the money that's kind of like leading or preventing us, is very important for folks to understand, and making sure that folks are getting civically engaged, because at the end of the day, as elected officials, whether folks want to or not, we are responsible to each and every one of our constituents. And so part of it is making sure that they're getting involved and they're getting involved with the process. Definitely, the Health Act and making sure that there's Medicare for all is a really big thing. And there's still resistance on that. Why we're even talking about it and why we're not moving it is really big. There's also a big push for legislation to help folks that are having problems, with their rent. We have this movement that's called Cancel the Rent. We want to cancel the rent for both residential and commercial spaces. Nobody should be forced to have to pay rent, especially when we have no income coming in. And we want to make sure that we're taking care of the small property owners, because they're the ones that are getting hurt. They depend on the rent from the tenants to pay their mortgages. We want to make sure that the government help and relief is not going to corporations. They can afford to take a hit. We need to help the folks that really need the help and make sure that they can get on their feet. So part of it is wanting to cancel the rent, getting rid of it completely. So no debt rent. No, none of this. You get 3 months and you can pay for it later. We want it canceled completely for the duration of the pandemic, and time beyond that, because people are going to need time to get back on their feet.
Right on. And there is a New York specific version of that legislation. Was there an eviction moratorium in New York?
There was an eviction moratorium. The eviction moratorium was for the first 3 months of the pandemic, and then every month it's been kind of like extended.
Right.
But the moratorium is just for right now. It's landlords can still file non-payment petitions. So when it's lifted, they're already a step ahead of the game to be able to displace their tenants. And it allows so it also prevents tenants that have been, who've lost their income due to COVID and the coronavirus. It prevents them from getting evicted, but there isn't any understanding of what kind of proof people need to provide. And if you think about, the working class, some of these businesses no longer exist. So I don't know where you're supposed to get proof that you got, that you're not working. But there's also like a huge immigration community that maybe was working, and, they don't have the documentation to prove it. They're not going to be able to get a W-2 or things like that to really be able to prove or have a check to prove that they were working.
Yeah, and the moratorium isn't canceling the rent. It's just you don't have to pay for these 3 months, but you have to pay those 3 months later somehow, doubling up on whatever months, right? So it's absurd on its face.
Well, if you think of it, I think from the landlord's perspective, it makes sense to them, right? This just makes it easier for them to get rid of their tenants. But what I don't understand is, even if they're successful in getting rid of us, who do they think is going to come and rent these apartments?
Right.
We're all struggling.
Yeah, we're all in the same. I heard someone say we're not all in the same boat. Everyone says we're all in the same boat. We're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm, right? Yeah. Our boats look different, right? So
definitely.
Yeah. Well, like I said at the top, thank you for your advocacy for the 10 years. That's frontline work. Like, I can't imagine how many lives you affected in a positive way. And I think that's absolutely incredible. And, you're exactly the kind of person that we want in a public servant seat. So, I think it's incredible that you won. I'd love to have you back on at any time to talk about any issue you think is important. So that's cool. Before we go, your website is marcelaforny.org. People should still vote for you on November 3rd, of course, right?
It's still a general election, and we're still fundraising. So if folks can donate, I'd really, really appreciate it. We still have staff, and we're about to gear up for the second part of the campaign.
Right on. Is there anybody else on the slate that you want to kind of make mention of within your district?
There's 4 of us that are DSA endorsed. There's Zora Mandati. There's Jabari Brisport, who I actually share. Our districts overlap. He's in the Senate and I'm in the Assembly. But we share part of the district, both in Sunset Park and Red Hook. And then Farah Forest Souffrant. So it's 4 DSA members that were elected, and we are the new New York City squad, along with Julia Salazar, that's already in the Senate, and then AOC at the federal level. So we're coming. Yeah, she busted that door open, and we're running in right behind her.
That's so amazing. So how did she get in touch with you? How did you find her? How did you gain that endorsement from her? Just out of curiosity.
I think definitely she knew about us during with the DSA work that we've done. We were always hopeful that she would endorse, but it's a different level of government. And I actually read in an article that she was actually criticized for endorsing at the state level, particularly because I was also challenging the assistant speaker.
Right.
So
she got that.
Yeah, God forbid. I'm always so surprised when elected officials get, they act like so offended that someone's running against them. I was like, well, that's how you got into office. You need to expect that every so often.
right? And it's a 2-year term, right? And I can't imagine you're not going to be face to face with your constituents fighting the same fight you've always fought. So, I imagine next time around they'll throw some other big money incumbent at you. But, if you're working for the people, they see it, they know, right? They know who's corrupt and who's not corrupt, right?
And that was really the key. I knew that, the key to winning this election was really the tenants that I've met and I've serviced and I've helped throughout the years.
Amazing. Awesome, Marcela. Well, it's a real treat to chat with you. And like I said, thanks for your work heretofore. I can't wait to see what you do when you get into the state assembly. Make a lot of noise, make a lot of ruckus. Very cool. Very much appreciated. So I look forward to speaking with you again. Good luck on November 3rd, even though it's kind of a formality. Anything else that we didn't hit on that you kind of want to make mention of? Or?
No, but, if you want to get to know me more and learn more about my platform, go to my website, marcelaforny.org. If you can make a donation, that'd be great. Any donation is very, very much appreciated. We are not taking any corporate money, real estate money, any special interest money. So those small donations are really, really important.
Right. And when you get there, the real estate guys are going to come up to you and they're going to, you're totally going to start taking it once you get to New York, right? When you get to Albany, I should say.
There was this great article that said something like REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York, thought things were bad when the historic rent laws passed. And they're realizing now that they just got a lot worse.
Right on. Cool. Well, bad for them, good for the people, good for your constituents.
Right.
So awesome. It's noble work. So it's much appreciated. Thank you. And it's a real treat to chat with you. So good luck in November. I hope to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. It was great talking to you. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Thanks.